Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Long Con, the podcast that takes a lighthearted and informative look at the destruction of Western civilization and the collapse of representative democracy. I'm glad to have you guys with us. We today are going to be talking about our central premise for this show, which is the 10 stages of The Long Con. And here to help me with that is the owner of the Players Workshop, corporate presenter and actor. I can't remember what we said. Jeff Rogers. Who are you, Jeff?
All of those things. Yeah, that's perfect. I think that actually makes me sound as much of a con man as anybody, giving me a certain level of knowledge about all of these things.
Well, so it's all probably coming together for you now, why we've invited you here.
Yes, right.
You know, a little BS is good, right? That's part of the American character. That's the positive side of the long con.
I think that's the exact part of the con that most people are attracted to, is the little bit of style, a little bit of flair that makes them feel like, oh, this is interesting and different.
Exactly. We like our buildings taller, our stakes thicker, and, you know, we want to be sold, right?
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
And so we're going to talk about that. So anyway, I'm really glad to have Jeff with us. Jeff is a friend, but he's super smart, and I think we're going to dive right in. So my idea was just to start in talking about, there's two different, what we call the 10 and 10. There are 10 stages of the long con, which is actually how I think this 70-year boondoggle is being perpetrated on us. And then there are the 10 facets of the war on democracy, which we'll probably talk about later or in another episode, which are what actually has happened to our country and what the mechanism is that's in place.
Yeah, and I have the 10 steps of the long con here. I just thought we could walk through them.
Yeah.
One by one here and kind of explore each one. Because I'm utterly fascinated by the process of this. How the con person, right? We typically say con man, but the con person,
yes,
is often playing on the reality that the mark, as it were, is the person who will really wants to trick themselves.
Right.
They just create the environment in which they can do that.
Yeah.
And this whole idea that this reality that we're living in right now with, self-help gurus and things along those lines, it's creating the environment for you to find out that you were right.
Right.
Right? That you are this thing that you thought all along. But it takes more than that. There's more steps to it. If you're doing it right, if you're really doing a good con.
Right. Yeah. If you're going to spend the time.
You want to do it right. So, so the first one of these is called foundation work.
Right.
So tell us, what is foundation work? What does that mean? And how is that created?
It's before you even have the mark. We're going to create the framework by which we're going to perpetrate this con, right? So you would have maybe your team together. You would discuss your approach to this.
There needs to be an environment, a reality that's created based on a gap, right? There has to be some gap somewhere that they see. And this is very similar to business, right? What you want to do in business is you want to spot that niche,
right?
That there is a bridge that is missing that you can create the product or whatever it is, and you have the solution for.
Right.
And that's where you want to play.
Yeah, it's you see an opportunity, exactly, and then you put the kind of the pillars in that you're going to use for framing, right? You build the set, right, for everyone to play in.
Yeah.
So there are lots of ways that happens in different types of cons. In terms of, I think our long con we're describing in the show, what it really relates to is the way that the initial inciting incident was a group called the Mont Pelerin Society that met in 1948 in Switzerland. I'm going deep already.
Wow, this is real. Yeah. We're there.
Some of you may have heard of the economist Milton Friedman, right? So this idea of free market economics. So really the central con was switching out explicit racism for the idea of free market economics, and then basically using this kind of extreme view of capitalism, laissez-faire capitalism, as the only example of liberty. And that anything other than this kind of cutthroat, unregulated reality is a form of collectivism or socialism or whatever. So the con is believing liberty means no government and everybody can do whatever they want.
So this is what it's like to go and have coffee with Paul, everybody. It starts off real fun, and then all of a sudden we're in
he seems normal.
Laissez-faire capitalism. And we're there, and we're already in the middle of it. All right, so just to take this back,
are my eyes dilated?
Bit, no, and our mind glazed over. Did I nap when you started saying all that? No. So, real quickly, what that brings to mind is, and something that I'm fascinated by is our use of language, right? How we utilize language, and this idea of switching out definitions of what things are and what we understand them to be is a big part of what the con is about, is having you think something that you believe fiercely.
Yes.
But the reality of it is this was not your original thought. This is not what you really wanted to have be your central thesis. This is something that was placed there or manufactured for you to grab hold of, and then because of our biases, right?
Yeah.
We're going to, once we start believing in it, once we've said yes, once we've given that initial yes, we want to keep on going down that road, because if we ever turn around and say no, that we disbelieve, then all of a sudden, what do we think about ourselves? All of our yeses were incorrect. And so what does that mean to us?
Absolutely. Right? That's exactly right. And, you and I probably more than the average listener have cause to run into like professional magicians as part of our work lives. I mean, I don't know if you do as much. I do a lot of trade shows, so I have a lot of friends that are magicians, but it's very much like that, right? The idea of forcing a card is maybe the start of it. Or what they call kind of limited options, right? I'm going to present a couple of things to you, limited options, and make you think you're choosing from a much larger selection of things. And I'm also going to stack information and present it in a certain order so that it's logically going to make you create, or choose what I want. So there's a lot of psychology involved in it. If it's a shill game on the streets of Manhattan, and I actually fell for one of those one time, it's not only how do we do the move the balls, get the ball, get the shells, get the table. We need the table. But, getting your team. You need 2 or 3 people to come in that are going to win money. Right. And that are going to, be shills. Are going to pretend like they're playing the game, doing really well. And that's how you're going to get the mark to step out of the crowd and say, I'll give it a go. Yeah, right. Lay that foundation. Right. So that's great. So that's the first step of it. You really do have to understand what's the area that you're going to play in, and what's the gap that you're going to sell people on of what you're going to have them believe. It sounds like, right? Yeah, and who is the team that's going to make that happen? To assist you in making that. Put your people in places, your props, your people. Right. And the structure. So now comes the one I think that, and we made reference to it moments ago, and I started using the language just because it's such fun language, right? So the second step of the long con is finding the mark. Yes. And the mark is what is referred to as the target, right? Right. This is who we're going after. So tell us, help us identify the mark. Yeah, so this one is interesting, and actually one of the things that was probably most surprising to me. So I should just say, I won't talk about a lot of books, but I do want to talk about 2 in terms of this. There was a classic that was written in the 1950s by a guy named David Maurer called The Big Con, Story of the Confidence Man. And if you like that kind of, razzle-dazzle, language and all the old-timey kind of things, it's a great read. Yeah, it is. Have you read this? I have that one. I saw that one sitting there. It's fantastic. And then the other one that I read most recently, which is really, I think, more germane and fascinating for us, is one by a psychologist named Maria Konnikova called The Confidence Game, Why We Fall for It Every Time. The 10 stages that I've created are based on the work they've done. So I'm co-opting them and tweaking them a little bit. So lest it seem like I'm, claiming these ideas as my own, I just want to put that disclaimer up there. But one of the fascinating things that she discovered is, there are certain elements that make up the ideal mark for the long con in particular, right? Okay. One is someone that is maybe a little bit emotionally vulnerable, and I think that wouldn't surprise anybody. But really, for the long, for people that were running this long con, swindlers, whatever, of the classic American con, what they want is someone who is successful, because they need to have the means to have them taken from them. Someone who tends to have faith and belief that the system works, and also even a personal faith that, whether it's in a higher power or just in themselves, that things can go their way. Right. So I think a lot of people think, that it's just going to be what we see now, these predatory calls to little old ladies, and we're going to scare you into our scam. But no, if you're running a true American long con, the classic long con, these guys who are like aristocrats of, criminality, who would never deign to, pick a pocket or something. So, base, it really is picking someone who is, again, successful, smart, faithful, and has a belief in their own ability and discernment.
Well, and I think that there's two other elements there as well. The first being that they also have to see that this opportunity that comes up, out of the blue, that this thing happened, but this opportunity, they're deserving of it.
Yes.
Whether it's legal or not legal, or and a lot of times it's right on the edge. It's like, yeah, it is legal. It's this loophole. They're presented with this rare opportunity that just seems to happen. But they're being granted access to it.
Yes.
Right? That's a big part of it.
Well, and we'll get into what you mentioned is, a whole different thing, but the idea of a certain amount of sketchiness or perhaps moral compromise even that's in there.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's really important, is that, and this is one of the great axioms of the con artists, is that there's a point, one of the stages we'll get to, where you actually force the person to compromise their morals in a way. Sometimes it could be something that could incriminate them later, crossing into illegality. But you basically, the axiom is no one ever walked away from a con at that point, right? Natural greed and rationalization and all of these things will kick in. And, if you've got the mark picked, you don't lose the mark when you try to get them to cut corners, And I think one of the things that we see here, which is really interesting, especially as it ties into things like, systemic racism or even sexism in places, and, some of the structures that are built into our system, is that kind of is inherently there. Like, as kind of, middle-class white guys, we know there's disparity. So when you're doing a long con on a group, the idea of, we have to focus on equality and all of that sort of thing, we're all willing to cut that corner, right? Because it's just like, what am I going to do? I'm going to give, more of my money or, whatever.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. The other element that I think you brought up that was interesting is this idea of, if you have achieved a high amount of success in one area, there's a tendency, a bias in your mind that, if I'm good at this, I must be good at all things. And that's a mistake that a lot of powerful or really talented people make. A really good example of that, Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Right? When he left basketball, considered one of the greatest athletes as a basketball player, went into baseball and found that he wasn't that good in that. I think a lot of people find... And that was a very stark lesson, right? I mean, it was blatantly observable.
Or, you know what? Let's get a great businessman to be president.
Yeah.
What we need is an outsider who's a business success, and let's get in there and run it like a business. And the fact is like, that doesn't translate. Like you said, right? I mean, if you just want someone who's smart and good at business, like if you're going to get like open heart surgery, that's not who you're going to pick.
Yeah,
you're not going to say, let's get Jeff Bezos in here to open you up. You're going to go for...
He's got to find some efficiencies. He's going to find some new ways to do
it. That's right.
It'll be less expensive. And that's not I don't want to indict people who have that. That's a natural way of looking at things, right? All of a sudden, your lens is focused on what you're doing. You achieve success at it because of a lot of different reasons.
Right.
So then once you hit that mark, especially very successful people see that as an amount of permission then to extend that across every area.
You're going to fall victim to your own press to some degree, right?
Yeah.
Because everything you touch is
That's
successful.
how ego works, right?
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that this is not always bad. Like, this is not against business people or against, the Bill Gates doing these types of things. It's just that the difference between a con and an American, I don't even know what we call it, sales pitch is the intentional deception and the lie. So what I'm getting at is that all of these things, you're saying it so well, are human characteristics, and yet there is someone behind the scenes that knows that these are human characteristics and has layered and set up the system in such a way that all the pieces will fall this way, everyone will think it's their idea, and they will come out on top.
And you bring up a great point that it's really the end goal. What is the end goal? So between a sales pitch and a long con. The sales pitch is trying to get you to buy the product, yes, but if they're a good sales professional, the goal is to solve your problem with their product, right? I mean, it's an honest goal. But then the long con, though, is deception. That's the goal of it, is to deceive you to the point of typically to get your money from you, to separate you from your money.
Yeah, or your power or your control.
Exactly.
Right? You know, because I think the Republican Party has been gutted and basically taken over by these interests. But it's not like, oh, these dumb, conservative rubes. These are smart, intelligent people. To say that the person who's going to be conned is somehow an idiot or mentally defective or blind is just not to actually deal with the reality.
Exactly. The entrepreneurial aspect of it as well is someone who's willing to take a risk, who's used to a little bit of risk.
Yes, right.
Right.
And what is more American than that desire to take a little risk to better ourselves, right? I mean, every facet of the American dream and expansion is predicated on that idea.
Yeah, yeah. So, all right, the foundation is laid. We know what con we're going to play. We know the area that we're going to play it in.
Yes.
We've put together our team, and we've identified our mark.
Yes.
All right. So the next step in the long con here is grooming the mark and gaining his trust.
Yes. Right. So
it's really about initiating that relationship, right?
Yeah, making that connection. And there's the classic one. If you've ever seen the movie The Sting, the really famous maneuver is Robert Redford bumps into Robert Shaw, who is the mark, on a train, takes his wallet, and that sets up all the other stuff. But then he comes back with his wallet, and so suddenly he is trusted by the guy. He's solved his problem. They connect. They have a similar sensibility and a sense of not only can I trust this guy, but if I trust him, this might turn out to my benefit.
Yeah, and I think you see that a lot today. When you get a white paper or something free from a website, or download this XYZ thing for free,
right?
That is the whole idea of that.
Right.
It's to get you to begin to trust them. It's to get you to feel like they're going to give you things beyond what you would possibly pay for, of a higher value.
Right.
And that, once you feel that relationship, that level of closeness to that product, that brand, whatever that is, you're going to keep on moving with that brand depending on where it wants to go.
You're telling the story. So you're actually kind of creating the whole story so that when you're playing the con, you're initiating with the mark, you gain their trust, you start talking to them, and you paint a picture pretty quickly where you play out the scenario of what this opportunity might look like, right? You don't get into all the details, you don't do that, but you at least give a narrative so the idea of this story is in there. And the other thing that's very important is they have an emotional response to it. Right. Whether it's greed or excitement or, enthusiasm.
I think that's a critical aspect of it, actually, is the emotional aspect. We make all of our decisions based on emotion. None of our decisions are based on fact and data. We take that in, but then we make an emotional decision.
Yes.
And once you're hooked on an emotional basis too, boy, you can tap into anything.
That is also like the bedrock kind of assumption of the con, and it's also been borne out by a lot of modern psychology. I mean, have you ever heard of that book, Righteous Mind: Why Good People Disagree About Religion and Politics?
Absolutely. Oh, that's a great book. I've never heard of that book.
So
Don't tell Paul. There's going to be a lot of books that are brought up.
I've got 5 books next to me. I'm not going to mention any more than these.
Wait, are you going to put links?
I'm going to put links for all of this stuff.
All right,
and these are all worth reading. But it's really fascinating because it's a psychologist, again, who's analyzed reams of data and comes to this conclusion that what you say is exactly right, that we make all of our decisions, especially if they're emotionally charged or kind of definitive decisions about religion or politics, instantly and based on emotion. And so what this guy describes rational thought, right? Whenever we think we're rationalizing, he calls it a post hoc process, right? You've already made the call before your brain even starts to analyze it and put together the arguments. You're not like a little scientist with beakers, we're going to measure this out and see what the results are. You are like an attorney who's defending a client, which is your emotions, and you're going to present the case on behalf of how you feel.
Right.
But you're going to think that you came to the rational conclusion. So really, this key to this playing the con is creating that emotional response, because then you're going to give them all of the things to create their own case, to create the logical structure, to come to the conclusion that they think is their free will and careful powers of analysis, but is really where you've set them up to land.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, because I think that's that's one of those things where I don't know if we really want to know that about ourselves, right? It's like, hey, do I have to know this now that it's all already preordained in my head, that I'm going to go that route on all of these decisions? I want to feel like I have that decision-making power.
Yeah, of course. And the real, even worse part of it is the more successful you think you are analytically, the less emotional you think you are as a person, the more susceptible you are. Because you're simply not aware, you don't have the self-awareness of how you're actually working.
Right.
Because this is everybody. And the first episode I did on this, I called The Matrix Has You, and I talked about my own experience in recovery, right, being an alcoholic. And I think it's really important because very rarely will any of us look at the mindset and the conditions that made us make that decision or thought or feel that way at the time, right? So we don't want to your point, go back and look at, okay, why did I think that? Why did I have that emotional response? But even more rare and almost, unheard of is to go back and say, okay, what's the foundation of my character and my personality that made me view the world in a certain way so that when this thing came up, I would have this response to it? Do you see what I mean?
My predilection for this is going to be based on something that occurred at some point that helps shape that path.
Exactly. And, if you are familiar with any 12-step program or whatever, I mean, that's the whole thing. You do an inventory where you put down all this stuff. And having done that once myself, I realized, okay, so I have all of these emotions that have driven me my whole life, and yet I have created in each instance a plausible, rational explanation. It's so kind of global for all of us, that having gone through that kind of really, where you really have the ability to step outside of yourself and go, whoa. That dude is not seeing the picture.
Right, right, exactly.
But nobody would do that if they didn't have to. I would much rather have, kept drinking for another 30 years. But, but I had to do that, right?
Yeah.
So again, the fact that anybody of their own volition is going to kind of do that analysis on themselves is, it's a big ask.
Well, that brings up two things. One is the idea that it is possible to do.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there is that ability to have that self-recognition and do that internal work. But the other thing that actually this brought to mind, do you remember the movie Excalibur?
I do. Oh, I love that movie.
Great
when I was
movie
a kid.
about
I showed it to my kids. They
King
thought it was
Arthur.
so damn corny. Anyway, go ahead.
It's super corny now. But there's one line in there that I use all the time. And whenever I see a situation like that where somebody is reverting to their sort of their programming. Their
that's right.
Personal programming, right?
Yes. Hardwire.
Yeah, is the line that Lancelot uses when he's at the end of the final battle, and he says, "It's the old wound, Arthur." And that to me, I mean, even as a teenager, I realized what he's talking about, and I always come back to that. Look, we go back to the old wound. Whatever that old wound, it defines a lot of our reactions.
Right.
And all of our wounds are different. All of our programming, it doesn't have to be a wound. I don't mean that it's, whatever that is.
No, it all goes right into our coding. Every trauma, every success. And it's an evolutionary thing that makes a ton of sense. I heard this stat that it takes something like 2 seconds to imprint a negative emotion and reaction to something, and something like 30 to 35 seconds to imprint a positive one.
Really?
Which is why you can remember in your life so vividly these scary, terrible times.
Yeah.
And the other ones are kind of maybe hazy, or you've created this stuff around them. But it's because there's no real evolutionary need to enjoy yourself. It's just don't get eaten.
Exactly it. It's all based on that lizard brain sort of survival.
Right.
And the adaptation to whatever those points of certain death that exist within the path that you're taking.
Which is why fear is the most effective tool of the con. Not in terms of the confidence man. It's greed and it's all that sort of thing. And there's some of that in the global con too. But in terms of what's happening to the American people and the divisiveness that we have right now in this highly polarized, angry thing, it's all predicated on fear. Right?
Yeah.
Fear of other.
Right. And that's that. But that also is a big key in terms of I'm missing out, right? Fear of missing out. It's I'm not going to have enough. I'm not going to be good enough, or I'm going to miss this opportunity to be even more successful.
Right.
Right. So it's all based in that kind of
and
math.
it will, even if I don't want to acknowledge it, it will put a pretty big ding in my perception of myself.
Absolutely.
If this opportunity goes by, that's the biggest danger. It's not that I might lose X amount of money.
I'm defined as this in my head. If I am not this, then who am I?
Right.
All right. So roping the mark.
Yeah, it's
really
introducing
bring 'em in, right?
the mark to the con's inside man.
Yeah.
This is what we would call, the shill. Right. Or the inside man or inside person to get your earlier nomenclature.
Yeah, well, and that is the idea behind, again, I keep bringing this up to sales techniques, but only because there's a lot of similarities. And it's something I think people can recognize immediately. Mm-hmm. But that third person commentary, that third person review, right, is so critical when we're looking online or something like that. We want to read the reviews. What does this person in, Walla Walla, Washington think of this dishwasher? We look for that because we are community based.
Right.
We're just not built to be.
Right. We're herd animals, right?
That's exactly it. We're not built to be the lone wolf. So we're constantly looking for that sort of, what do you call that when you're getting that third person?
Confirmation bias?
That confirmation bias, exactly. In order to really define and help us figure out what we're doing. The unfortunate part about that is we're not great at vetting where or whom that is coming from,
yes, right? And I know in sales, right? Isn't that a huge part of it?
Absolutely. And I bring up sales a lot. I host meetings and events for a lot of different companies. Oftentimes they're sales meetings. They're kick off the year meetings. So I'm privy to a lot of these conversations from very successful salespeople.
Yeah,
so I get the kind of behind the scenes knowledge of why they go about it this way, what the thinking is behind it. And most of them are really very ethical, great people who are doing this for all the right reasons. They believe in a product and blah, blah, blah. However,
nice disclaimer.
You can, right? But you can see how this can easily be turned and used for the dark side in a heartbeat, because we are that community, we're that herd, and that we're looking for that confirmation bias.
And the inside man could be almost anything. It could just be the person on Facebook that posts the really interesting article that says exactly what you wanted to say.
I'll tell you what, there's a long con that people, that everyone has absolutely embraced. They have even come out and said, we are running social experiments. That's right. We are doing this on your feed. And we're like, okay.
No one's going to pull one over on this dude.
And there, if we go back to
thumbs and knows what's going on all the time.
So if we go back to the definition of the mark, which is perfect, it's someone who is smart, has intelligence in certain areas. And you bring up this idea of this, article on Facebook that says everything I want to say. Then that is put together with, the exact ideas that they want you to think and lead you to. So you might agree with the first couple of ideas, and then the third and fourth idea lead you to this different place that really does support what they want you to believe.
And the other heart of the con, which is really not only American, but is human and is something that we desperately need. I mean, have you ever heard of Tom Peters? He's like a business guru.
Sure.
Yeah. So he has this. I figured if anybody had it, it would be you.
Yeah.
But there's this famous quote of his that is, the whole secret to our success is being able to con ourselves into believing that we're going to change the world, because statistically we are unlikely to do it.
Right.
Right? So I'm going to be the one to be the next billionaire. Why not?
Yeah.
There's 600 of them and 350 million people, and every structural thing is against me, but why couldn't I?
Absolutely.
It's that thing. And it's a natural, healthy, I think like it's the Nietzschean, will to power, right?
Yeah.
This life energy that fuels us.
Well, and ambition isn't bad.
And don't get me started about Nietzsche and
I was just going to say, as soon as you brought that up, I was like, okay, this is going to take a turn.
Laissez-faire.
I will help all of you listening right now and bring them back into this area that we're actually talking about. But the idea of ambition and being able to do that. And that's why, unfortunately, that's why the lottery exists.
Right.
It plays upon that exact concept of, I'm going to be able to do this because I'm going to get lucky one day, and then this will happen, and I'll get all this money.
Yeah, that's
whatever
perfect.
that is. All right, so we'll go to the next one here, which is telling the tale, drawing the mark into the scheme, and testing his moral fiber.
Right. So that's kind of a two-part thing there. The telling the tale is kind of like playing the con, right? It's basically setting them up, but it's getting into more detail, right? Now we're going to actually talk about the mechanics of how this great opportunity is going to work, and testing the moral fiber is, it's like insider trading, right?
Right.
Well, technically it could put you in prison for 10 years, but everybody does it, and you know what?
Done.
It's just because I know it's my friend.
Done.
My friend works for the company, so, it's no big deal. You're just, 30, you're 2 nanoseconds before the other traders in your little computer thing, and
So let's stop right there
a few
for a second.
milliseconds between friends.
Yeah, and that is so key. And I think it's interesting that you say that no one walks away at that point. Have you read anything or have you done any research? How is it possible to walk away at that point? What would be a key for that? Because I'm thinking of myself, and we've all faced these little moments.
Right.
It's not even a con. It's just that these are the steps, the psychological steps that we take to get there, to rationalize some of the decisions that we make. And if you've read anything or seen anything that would allow you a moment, right? A trick or something that will take you out of your funnel for a moment and allow you to observe what's going on and be able to step away. If there's anything along those, I'm putting you on the spot.
I don't know if there is. Because there's the emotional. You have that emotional charge. You've got someone that shows up to give you that confirmation bias, and you're already halfway down the trail.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing that starts to happen in this one. Actually, is not only are you testing your the person's moral fiber, but that's when they feed out the rope. Right. There's all kinds of rope for this person to run with, and everybody starts selling themselves.
Yeah.
We, if given an opportunity, will con ourselves. If I have enough things to choose from,
we're so weak, Paul.
We're so weak.
We're so
and
weak,
stupid, and emotional.
Yeah.
But not really us. Just Republicans.
No.
No, it's all of us.
It is. It's all of us. And that's the thing.
Us.
It really is admitting. Look,
and arbitrary. For the average person, that's what I think is different, because there is objective reality, like what's going on in like Trump world and like the criminality that is happening there.
Right.
But for the average person, the red or blue voter, we are so far removed from any of that we have a worldview that emotionally makes sense, that's based on our own morality, that has been grafted onto so successfully that it feels like us.
Yeah.
So once you have made that emotional decision and you start, rationalizing, which we do instantaneously, then presenting counterfactual information only entrenches the other person.
Yes.
Right? You're not going to make you're never going to convince anyone of anything with an intellectual argument.
And
you're
that's
only going to make them double down.
Right. And that's both sides. We point to the Republicans, and then we're talking about billionaires as part of this, and we'll get into that.
Beings.
But it is both sides. Yeah, it is, and I say both sides, Republican, Democrat, but it's everyone. We all do that, and none of us wants to feel that we are that entrenched in our modality of thought. But listen, look.
Got free will, baby.
Yeah.
I'm all about liberty.
Yeah, that's exactly it. But we are. And it's a natural response. It's how all of us are made. That's how the equipment works. As we were talking about this, one thing popped into my mind was the idea of maybe a certain amount of mindfulness would play a role in allowing us to kind of step back for that moment and really sort of digest it on a deeper level.
Once any bit of like red tinges come around the eyes and I'm like, the steam starts to lift, I'm compromised, right?
Yeah.
And this is where we are in America, and why I call the American dream the American fever dream, right? You can't see it while you're in it. Like if you have carbon monoxide poisoning in your house, once it's already there and descended, you can't see it. You can't tell that it's there. If you become aware something's wrong, you're already so compromised that you're certainly not going to be able to make a rational and a reliable response, but you may be incapable of making any response at all.
Yeah, and not that this is a self-help thing, but I think that idea of the trap door, giving yourself the trap door of stepping out of it, and of being mindful of having that moment of, okay, I need to take this step away from the keyboard.
Yeah, right.
I was literally yesterday. The fingers started tapping. I was like, you know what? No good is going to come from this, other than, I'm going to feel a lot better once I send it. Once everyone knows what I'm thinking. But when you're in the flow of it, it's so difficult to do, which every con man absolutely knows is the case.
Or for magicians, like, information stacking.
Yeah.
There's a trick that I see at trade shows sometimes where they have like a grid, right? And they'll say, okay, think of a number. It can be anything between 1 and 9 or whatever. But somehow they say it. So like, you say 6, right? They know. They've planted that. So that when they do this whole big elaborate thing, it's like, holy shit, like he read my mind. But basically, all he did was present the information in a way, hit you a little bit on the side so you'd have emotional tilt, distract you, and it just slotted right into your brain.
Exactly.
And it works often enough that they can do that trick, 50 times during the course of an average show day.
And
and it won't work maybe a couple times.
Yeah.
But it might work all 50.
Yeah.
It's, again, human nature. I mean, that's the other thing you see, too, is that, like, when I do a lot of trade shows and corporate events, right? And it's like, doctors and surgeons will show up and want the freebie, just as much as, anybody, right? That human greed, that herding mentality of, oh, hell yes, I want a T-shirt.
These are literally millionaires, and they want this free T-shirt.
Yeah, or, like, what were the things, the spinners that were popular for a while?
Yeah,
the fucking,
right.
I mean, there's just landfills of those things now.
Yeah, and that's so funny. That drive, I'm not gonna miss out on that free thing. Right. I'm gonna get mine.
I didn't get to where I am by not staying here for a free T-shirt.
That coffee cup. Are you kidding me? That's right. What are you doing?
Yeah, right. And all of how many of those things are in the trash in the airport when they can't get in the carry-on. I mean, it's just
or used as a car wash rag. Is the other part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry.
All right, so the mark has been roped in.
Mark has been roped in. The deck has been stacked. They have tested. They've had their moral fiber tested and found wanting.
Yes. So now comes the convincer. The convincer providing a short-term gain that excites the mark and pulls him in.
Yes. So this is kind of like where we talked about, right, with the lottery, right? Like this. Oh, this person won. I mean, it even happens in the kind of natural order of, like, if you gamble at a casino, right?
Sure.
Like you have, you sit down, you get a couple blackjacks, and then you're like, oh, wow.
Hey, I'm good.
Everybody wins. I'm good at this. I can do this, right?
So I have to tell you my first experience in Vegas, right? So I was touring with the Second City, so which meant I had very little money. We had our per diem on us, and we were in the hotel, what's the castle?
Excalibur.
Excalibur.
Classy.
It was super classy hotel and a casino in Vegas. So we're in there, and I go to the slot machines. I hit $250, like pretty early on.
Wow.
And I'm like, that's more than I'm getting paid for the gig.
Yeah, right.
Wait a minute. I know how to play slots.
Guys.
I have a gift. I didn't know I had this gift. This gift. So meanwhile, cut to like 11 o'clock that night.
$400 later.
Absolutely. I've spent my rent. Yeah. I've put everything back into this machine. I had to call my wife and say, look, don't pay rent.
Yeah.
Because we don't have the money.
We hold all bills.
Yeah. I spent the rest of that trip in my hotel room, by the way, with another actor who did the same exact thing. And both of us sat there like, waiting for one meal a day, because back then you could eat for $1.99 an entire meal.
Right.
And I had to call Second City and get an advance on my paycheck for the work that I was doing right there. But that initial win convinced me.
Yeah.
And you could not have talked me out of it that, look, walk away. You just beat the house.
Right.
Walk away.
Right.
That initial win flips switches in your head.
Right.
That convinces you all of those things, right? You have this gift. You have this power. This is what you were meant to do. This is, you know.
Right. Again, because it hits that emotional button. You get that strong emotional response, and then you're going to build whatever rationalization you need around it, right? And boom, you've all of a sudden, you've been hooked. And by the time you start to realize it and know it, it's like, well, no, because I'm just going to get it back. You get into that kind of grim thing of like, I'm not going to be a failure. I'm not going to be a sucker.
Right.
So if I'm a sucker because I gave you $100, I'm going to give you $200 and prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And that happens. I mean, the marks that they go after, they just tend to be rinse and repeat, because they cannot afford the psychic and emotional capital of admitting that they had been had. It's funny, when you said that, the famous story about my dad in Vegas was my mom, in the middle of the night, one night, 3 a.m. in Las Vegas, there's this banging on the door, bang, 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 bang. And he says, I need some money. I'm on a roll. I need some money. I'm on a roll.
That's great.
Which is like
that's
that
awesome
in a nutshell, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
it's perfect.
He was
that's
on
a
top
perfect
of the
snapshot. I'm doing great. I just need the money to keep that going.
I'm making so much.
Yes, right. It has to turn around, and that's built into the entire process, right? Mm. Once you've earned that trust once, you're good to go.
Right.
All right, so we have the convincer. We've got that idea of the short-term gain. The mark is excited about things. Mm-hmm. And so then we get down to the breakdown and send, which is a setback that gets the mark to double down and risk more. Right. And this is the psychology you're talking about. This is so fascinating. And I say it's so fascinating because I've lived it.
Yeah.
I think we've all done this, where it's like we get have some sort of failure.
Yeah.
And then we want to we're going to do twice as much.
So I
now.
mentioned this to you earlier. I have a similar story that I will tell you about your Vegas story, as a young actor. I have the same one. I went to New York for the very first time when I was 22. I was graduating from college when we went out to do this actor showcase out there, right?
Sure.
I didn't have a pot to piss in. I was sleeping on, friends' floors, probably $80 to my name,
Right.
40 was on me and 40 was in my checking account. And I'm down in, the Lower East Side or somewhere in the Village, and I see this huge group of people around, and I go over, and there's a dude sitting on, a turned over can, and he's got a little table, and he's moving these cards around, and he's got the, like 3 cards folded over. It's a 3-card Monty, right? Follow the ball.
No.
And I see all of these people around there, and I see someone come up there and wins like twice in a row. And like, another time they lose, they win. The guy wins 3 times in a row. Then someone comes up and loses. But you know what? I saw where the ball was. He picked the wrong one, but I could see which one it was. Every time they picked it, I knew where it was.
Right.
And so I'm sitting here thinking, holy shit, all of New York City, only Eagle Eyes,
Right.
trainer, made for this opportunity.
This is my gift.
And I, like a sucker, walked up and probably put 25% of my net worth, down on the table, slapped it down and said, yeah, okay, let me try, right? And boom, it's gone. I pick it, it's wrong. He's palmed it. They've been waiting for me, right? And half of the people in this crowd of 30 are probably on the payroll,
Sure.
At least 5 or 6 of them, right? That's their foundation work. So I was so upset, and I'm like, no, it's good. And he goes, it's all right. You could get it. He's like, you just fell off. And I'm like, I don't have any more money. And he's like, well, you go get some. He's like, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 for 1. If you get the next one, you go 20 again, and I'm going to give you 80 back. And I'm like, oh shit, how could I not?
Yeah,
so I literally went, and thank God, the only saving grace is that there wasn't an ATM like on that block.
Right.
Like I had to go like 2 or 3 blocks, but I did, man. And I was busting through traffic. My face was all red, my ears were hot, and I got to the ATM, and it's like, you do not have enough money for 60. I'm like, all right, I'll do 40, right? And it literally is spitting out the last money that I have in the world, and I'm like ripping it out. And I had this brief moment of clarity of like, holy shit. And it wasn't even holy shit, I'm a big sucker. It's holy shit, I know I can win, but
Yeah, right,
I really
of
have
course.
to have a little careful there. It wasn't like that. It wasn't like going to pan out.
Yeah.
But I had enough breathing room. That mindfulness you talk about.
Yeah.
That I so rarely have as a nearly 50-year-old man on Facebook. I don't seem to have that margin at all.
Yeah.
But I fell for it hook, line, and sinker. I was ready, man, because I was out there in New York to become a star. I was going to be discovered. I was going to break 3-card Monty, which I just realized existed. Right, and it was Land of Milk and Honey, baby.
This is going to be a great origin story. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, all right, exactly.
Yeah. Well, and I think that all of these elements are key to recognize, look, this is built into our wiring.
Right.
Again, these are all things that exist within us. It's not because those people are stupid,
right,
who fall for these cons, it's all built in. What someone is doing is taking advantage of their understanding of that wiring.
Right.
And it just made me flash on, I'm not going to, Bernie Madoff.
Oh, uh-huh.
Right. I mean, here you've got truly brilliant people who in their own capacity are brilliant, right? In this field are brilliant.
Yeah,
right.
As investors.
Yeah. It's not even the adjacency bias. This is what they do for a living. The SEC was vouching for Bernie Madoff.
Right.
And the fact that he was able to ply his game with all of these experts in the field is because this is built in. And that 10 seconds of awareness, that trap door, if you can use it, is really, it seems like the only defense.
But if you turn around and, the inside man is standing behind you going, hey, I can loan you 20.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's a whole thing. Just real quickly, talking about the long con and in New York City, I used to do some work for so I have to be careful, I guess, about who I say this is
not on
professional.
My account.
Well, I'll say this.
What? No one other than you and I and my
are
mom
ever going to listen to this?
Hear this, Jeff. So
a professional sports league. Let's say that. A professional sports league. And
a top tier professional sports league?
Top tier professional sports league. And I used to do some work for them. And what they had a couple of talks that they would give during this event. And for new people coming into this sport, right? And so the first talk was from someone who was very high up in the FBI. And I'm keeping this as generic as I can, but I throw the FBI in because...
It was James Comey, wasn't it?
It was totally Comey. No. Though...
But someone who's specializes in fraud.
Someone who's very high up in the FBI is what I'll say. And would come in and say, listen, you're about to go into this sports league that draws a lot of attention, and you are going to be targets. So be aware, try and understand what happens.
Right.
The next person they had come in was a mob guy, a legit mob guy who was in the witness protection program, left it, wrote a book. I mean, like totally legit mob guy. He would come in and say, so this is how I'll get you.
Yeah.
You'll come into my city.
Yeah.
And I'll know every team that's playing and where they're going to go hang out, what bars. I have people at every bar. It's what I do. I give a little bit of money to the bartender. He sends me a text. Right. I show up at said bar with some, girls and some fun people, and everybody's looking to have a great time. I ingratiate myself to you. We have a great time.
Right.
And then the next morning you wake up in a hotel room that you don't recognize, and I've taken pictures of you in bed with the 300-pound transvestite. So now I've got these pictures. I show the pictures to you, and you're going to do what I ask you to do in given games. Now, I'm not going to make it every game. I'm not going to ruin your career, but every now and then. And this is how I'll do it. And you know what? I've told you this story, and I know that people in this room are still going to fall for this same thing. And afterwards, very funny, the guy from the FBI is standing there, and no one is coming up to talk to him. The guy from the mob is standing there. He's got the turtleneck on, the leather jacket. Everybody's going, tell us some stories, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, this is so cool. Your life is so cool. It's like, what are you doing? This is the bad guy.
Yeah, this is not the one you want to.
Yeah, exactly. Right. You want to avoid. All right. So now the next one is the touch. And this is the con comes to fruition, and the mark is completely irrevocably fleeced.
You've voted. You've signed the paperwork. Yeah. You've turned over the cash, and we're done here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's, and I said everything leads up to this. The reality is it goes further than this, because the next two are really the key elements.
And they're what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly. So getting the money, getting the vote, getting the power, whatever, taking that from the mark is absolutely the idea of the con. That's the goal of the con. Right. But it's not done yet, because we have these two steps. The first one is the blow off. Right, which is avoiding blame while getting the mark to accept failure and move on. That is so brilliant. Right. They feel the guilt and the shame and all of that, and it's their fault. Right. What?
Yeah, it's either their fault or it remains not their fault. Because a lot of times in the con, what will happen is that it will be spun like circumstances beyond our control has led to your $1,000, your $6 billion disappearing on the tarmac in Afghanistan, or whatever it might be, or Iraq, and the person can't face the reality of them being at fault, so they refuse to internalize that shame. Right. The first thing in the psychology is going to be say, "Oh, there was a breakdown," and it's like the whole Jeff Goldblum line, if you remember from Big Chill, or he says, rationalization is more important than sex, and they say, no. He's like, well, when was the last time you went a week without a rationalization? This is right how we do it.
And I don't know about anybody else who's listening to this, Paul's mom, that for me, just having this conversation, I am literally Rolodexing every scenario that I have absolutely fell into.
You're a little embarrassed, aren't you? Yeah, well, it's a little humiliating.
Yeah. And it's like my first instinct is to try and push that down, which I think maybe a lot of us would try and do. But the reality is, don't do that. Let that sit in that for a moment. As my friend Dave Rosowski would say, sit in it.
Yeah, right.
He's got a great TED talk about TEDx talk about sit in this moment.
Yeah.
Don't push these emotions away. Experience the emotions. You had this feeling at the end of it of the shame or whatever it is, but I'm going to push that away. I'm going to dress it up. I'm going to put lipstick on the pig.
Yeah, and I think that's where we are, honestly, with Donald Trump. For the people that supported Trump and thought he would be a business person that could run things and it could be successful, people on a visceral, personal level cannot face that this guy is a charlatan, a criminal. Perhaps he's got dementia. He's probably a malignant narcissist. It's too much. It's much better to keep up the facade long afterwards. And go and for these people that are marked, if they don't have the shame, it's the one that got away, right? This is then the big fish story, right? They're going to go away and talk about this great time and oh man, it was awesome and oh, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but boy, was I in it. You know what I mean? And they're going to make themselves the hero of the story.
Sure. And how often have we heard that narrative of the the fish out of water who's able to walk into this established system and make everything different, change it all, right? I mean, that's a huge part of our our narrative set. Someone from the business world coming in who's a little crass, who's a little bit more like you and me in terms of maybe not speaking in a very educated way. Well, then this is the person who can shake things up and make things more real and drain the swamp.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And now we've made that investment. We voted, right? We had the touch.
Like you just
how
not
can I
do it.
possibly back away from this position?
I can't.
Yeah,
right.
This is part of me now.
Right. So the blow off is not really just I took your money, now shut the fuck up and get out of here. It's I took your money, but good job, buddy.
Yeah.
See you next time. We'll get him.
You just
we'll
missed
get him.
it.
Right.
You
And
just,
then yeah,
look at
exactly.
everything you did. I mean, you did win once.
Yeah, you did.
So you didn't win this one.
Yeah.
But,
and probably if you would have done this, it's a little different. You could have, but you know what? We'll come back to you.
And then the final one, putting in the fix, which is ensuring the mark will never admit to being conned or seek justice. And there's a couple of different ways to do that, right?
There is. So putting in the fix, I mean, in a way, this is kind of what we talked about, like that they will never, if there is the shame component, if they know,
right.
if it's something that's blatantly illegal or unethical or involves, cheating on their spouse or whatever it might be, right? There's a line that people are going to cross that they're never going to admit to it.
Yeah.
And so that fix is basically the leverage you have to put your thumb on them so they're never going to do it. And the fact is we've seen that with the erosion of the rights that we have not only under the legal system, but voter purges.
Yeah.
Right? We're not going to let you
thinking
vote.
that.
We can get rid of that. There are all these limits that we now see coming down like a ton of bricks to basically limit our ability to fight back or find justice collectively.
Even have a voice.
Right.
And that's what this final step is all about. It's taking away your voice to be able to comment on it or to seek justice on it.
But that's why we have this show, my friend.
Yes,
this little fart in the hurricane is gonna.
We are changing it all.
Well, that's great. Well, any final thoughts on this? This has been a really fun conversation.
Fun and painful in the way that now I'm really in a good depression about all of the really bad choices I've made.
It's true.
There's so many, Paul. There's so many bad choices.
Jeff, I'm not here to tell you that you're not a loser. That's not going to
Thank
happen.
you. All right.
You're welcome. But I think that you have offered your own hope in several ways, which is mindfulness. A fearless willingness to look at oneself and the environment in which you're in. Question the premises you're handed. Question your alliances. All of this can be done, and I think that because the long con involves billions of dollars to create this basically alternate universe that they've convinced half of us to buy into and then weaponized against the half that haven't. At least and again, Democrats are involved in all that too. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yeah.
We can see what's going on. We do have access. We have Cambridge Analytica, knows what I'm going to do today, but I also can find information on a level I never could before. You can look at all this stuff, and that's what this show will be about. We're going to talk about 501c3s, charitable organizations, the way the money is spent, the way that it funnels, and basically the way to test something, hold something up and say, does it hold water, And I think, follow the money is going to be, the credo for the show.
And that's been true forever. I mean, that maxim has been true forever in terms of if you really want to get down to the bottom of it, follow the money.
Right.
And that's what every court case is always based on, right? Well, who benefited? Follow the money, see where that ends up, and then make your decision about whether or not you feel
and when the money, and I will make that thing, when the money goes, in ways that the Democrats are complicit and make really bad choices.
Without a doubt.
It happened with Clinton. It happened certainly with Obama and the bank bailouts.
Yeah.
We can go into all of that. It's still follow the money.
Yeah.
And it still doesn't mean that because this guy did it and this guy and they're on other sides of the aisle that it's not part of the same con.
Right, exactly.
So, all right, well, Jeff, take a nap. I think you'll feel better. You'll wake up this afternoon with your normal spring in your step.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for that.
And thank you all for listening. Please check us out on Facebook. You can join the discussion at the Long Con Pod. You can tweet at me. I have 33 followers. It's Jeff, my mom, and a handful of others. Right. But we'd like to build that into the millions. So, follow us on Twitter. And please stay tuned. We got amazing shows coming up. And our next episode is actually going to be, Jeff will be back with us to talk about the 10 facets of the war on democracy. So that'll be fun.
Dun, dun, dun.
That'll cheer you right up. Thanks, everybody.